Time to make some funny faces at people.
Ah!
Okay, we are actually live. So here I am, everybody. Welcome. Here talking with Corey Dowds tonight, my side of the world, and today on his side of the world, but I guess it's today wherever we are. And we're going to talk today a little bit about Rahu and Ketu. And if everybody's wondering what I'm doing in the background, I'm posting a link on my Facebook page. So I'm going to let Corey do some talking now while I'm posting the link. So Corey, take it away and talk to people a little bit.
All right. Hello, people. Yes. Hello, Earthlings. Okay. So my name is Corey Dowds. I'm a Vedic astrologer. I've known Michael for a couple years now. Today I want to talk a little bit about Rahu and Ketu, and which we both have a lot of experience working with in charts and in our practice. I recently taught a little course on this. It's a 4-hour course. The first hour is actually another astrologer, Nadia Smirnova, a Western astrologer, does a little introductory hour on the physics and the geometry of the lunar nodes. And she actually was a physicist for the USSR, a nuclear physicist. So she's got a lot of cool diagrams and visual aids to help you understand it. And then she kind of takes it away to me for a 3-hour course on the nodes, where we go through all the basics pretty much of how to read the nodes in your chart, reading them in the signs, reading them in the houses and with planets, So it was really good. It was really a lot of fun. I'm really happy about the way that it came out. It was live. It was with, random astrology students who submitted their charts. The first 12 people to register, got to let us use their charts as guinea pigs, and it went really well. And they pretty much it was all good. So you guys check out this course.
Where can they find the course at, Corey?
Yeah, I have posted a blog post about it on my site. But if you are watching this at some other time, maybe a year from now, right now, today it's February 20th, 2018, at the time that we're making this, I have a section on my site of classes, and as I do more, I will add things there. But you can also go to astrologyisscience.com, and that is the website that my class is on. And it's actually a very cool system because there's a lot of different astrologers who have classes on there. And by the time you watch this, hopefully there are a lot more courses on there. So you might even see some other classes you like as well.
Wonderful. Hey, Corey, can you turn your speaker down a little bit? Or you're using headphones. For some reason, I'm getting some feedback.
Yeah, let me...
Everybody bear with us for a second.
How does it sound now? Does it sound better now?
That is better. It might be on my end, too. Can you hear me okay? Yeah?
Yeah, I can hear you okay.
Okay, excellent. So everybody who's watching us, we are going to take some questions towards the end. And so Corey and I are going to talk a little bit tonight about some, general things with Rahu and Ketu. We may talk about a few specific placements here and there. When we get around to the question bit at the end, please, people, I know it's kind of tempting to do this, but please don't go, I have this planet here, I have that planet here, I have Rahu here. What does it mean? Here's my reasoning behind that. The main thing being is judging something so sensitive as that based upon one or two planetary placements really does not do you a service as a client. And then it kind of takes you kind of go away feeling like something about your chart that may or may not be true. So it's not always the best thing. So I'm never a big fan of doing that. Okay, so, but anything in general that you have to ask about stuff that we're talking about, that's absolutely fine. And we'll check for some questions here at the end. So what do we want to talk about first? What do you feel tempted to talk about?
Let's talk about just some of the general trends that I see when their nodes are in different signs. And we can start with where they're at now, like Rahu in Leo, Ketu in Aquarius. So at the time the astrologer contacted me, she was saying, it's really kind of neat because she was a part of the NCGR and this organization, but she was like, gosh, I watched this video where Ryan was talking about some placement with Rahu, and she's like, wow, it's amazing, so accurate. And she was noticing, there's all these little astrologers who have their little kingdoms, which is like Rahu and Leo, you know what I mean? Who are like building these little like YouTube kingdoms or these little worlds and things like that. You see a lot of that now. And with Ketu and Aquarius, a lot of people might have been feeling more of an element of wanting to kind of detach from groups or like social cliques, social status, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And thinking more about like, what do I really want to do? It doesn't, maybe if the group wants to go this way, what about me and what do I really want to do? That's been a theme that I've seen a lot with readings that I've done for people. Even just yesterday, I was doing a reading for someone who kind of ended a marriage that she didn't want to leave it back in August when the first eclipse was happening.
Mm-hmm.
She was having to leave a marriage, but she didn't want to, but her partner was like kind of making her. And then it came, and she almost got a reading then, but she was too stressed. It was one of those things. It was like, okay, well, we should never get one. Then she contacts me like a week or two ago and was like, okay, I'm fine with it now. We're getting a divorce. Like, I want to get a reading about how to move forward. And it made a lot of sense that, now these things were concluding in the next eclipse, her whole relationship. And she was a Leo. So she had Ketu in the 7th. So it was like, okay, it's time to kind of, well, Ketu in the 7th is one indicator for like kind of completing your relationship karmas with that, with that person. And so, what I told her were a lot of things she had already been doing, working on herself more. I recommended even a hatha yoga practice because it was really important for her to take care of her body at that time, and other indications indicated it. So if you're a Leo, it can also be like Rahu moving through your ascendant. It can be an important time to focus on your health or your body, maybe. My brother, I have an older brother who's a Leo, and he's family, so I feel like it's okay for me to tell about his placements.
Right.
You know what I mean? So.
Oh, he's watching now. He just typed into the chat window, "Don't you dare type." I'm kidding.
Okay, I was about to say that'd be cool if you did. Hey, thanks for watching, bro. No, but he's been needing to work on his weight and kind of get it together a little bit more. But he didn't need anyone to tell him that. Like it was like within the last month, he's been like, man, I really want to lose weight. I really want to get it together. And he's changing his diet. He's exercising a lot more. He's trying to get me to go out and skateboard with him. And he's like 36, so he hasn't touched a skateboard in a while. But that's one way that Rahu can play itself out. Rahu crossing the first house for him being a Leo, and Rahu, and he had kind of been disconnected from his body and not noticed that he had been gaining a lot of weight and that it had been throwing off his health. And so that was one way. But I just thought of another funny thing with him. So we just had the solar eclipse, okay? And for a Leo, it was in his 7th house. And that has to do with also like pleasure and enjoying life and socializing, Mm-hmm. So his favorite bar in Charleston that he always goes to decided they were closing, and they officially announced it on the day of the eclipse. And so he was heartbroken. He literally told me, "I'm heartbroken." You're an astrologer. You can see how that makes so much sense.
Yeah. So with the Rahu, especially because Rahu being, would deal with intoxicants and things along those lines anyway.
Even more so because he actually has Mars and Rahu on the ascendant, and Mars, that's kind of a So,
but it's interesting because something that I have witnessed with this particular transit, especially as you were talking about Ketu and Aquarius, I also have been noticing the theme of, like you're saying, detaching from the collective, but so one can find one's own niche so that one can reincorporate back into the collective, only in a different way. And maybe
Absolutely.
With people who are going through relationship things during this particular time in relation to this, it's about learning how to approach relationships in a different manner once they're more familiar with themselves as an individual.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. And that's something that we need to remember. Sometimes when I'm counseling people on Ketu, I really need to remember that because, Ketu is what we really want. It's like our heart. And so you shouldn't just be like, no, you'll never have that. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times people might come to you and had a reading where some guy was like, you're never going to have wherever the thing is K2's at. And that's not quite the case. Like, that's not quite the truth. And it's like, it's better to just speak to the whole issue, and
Definitely.
which you can't just do that in one sentence. And I think that's also what I was thinking when you were kind of telling people, okay, don't ask for this placement, don't ask a question, ask me to answer it. Because if it was that simple to answer a question, then I wouldn't be doing readings. It would be doing one sentence readings. Every reading I did would be one sentence long, right? No,
wow, that's an idea. I'll make millions. So we'll do one sentence readings. Kidding.
Yeah, but some people might. Yeah, who knows?
But something I wanted to touch on now that we're on that too. I mean, I do as part of my practice, I do a lot of karmic analysis consultations. And every time I'm doing one of those, even in going into that, I feel like I'm only able to touch on one miniature, minute portion. I could sit there and probably go on for like hours with it, because I find with Ketu and Rahu, with what they're bringing to the surface. So let's say, for instance, we were talking about Ketu in the seventh and Rahu in the first. It's not just those relationships that are going to be coming to the surface, or the individual needing to strike their own path. It's going to be everything seventh house associated that tends to come to the surface all at once. And it's all going to be approached in different ways based upon the different Varga charts, right?
Yeah.
And so there's so much to go into. There's so much to go into.
You're right. And this is sort of another aside, but you made me think of it. I've been reading this book called Cosmos and Psyche. It's like sort of a book. It's sort of a Western astrology.
Who wrote the book? I think I know the book.
Richard Tarnas.
Yeah, that's a good book. I do know the book.
It's very very wordy and brainy, and apparently it's brought some academic people to astrology. Mm-hmm. So whenever something does that, I'm like, ooh, okay, I'll check it out, because I want to know about it. And
he talks about world trends in there.
Yeah, and I'm only about 60 pages in. So right at this point, he's finally at this point where he's saying that, being an academic and scholarly, I normally completely dismissed astrology, but then I kept hearing from inside the psychological community, like this sort of undercurrent of like, if you actually look at people's charts in the detailed Jungian way, or with actually drawing a birth chart like what we do, not just reading a sun sign, and you actually notice when transits of, like, say, Jupiter auspicious transits happen, and when they actually overcome an issue, and then when they're their most psychologically stressed, correlates to Saturn or whatever, a transit like that. And he was saying, like, basically I started to notice all these things, and what he came to conclude was that astrology was not able to predict the future so much, but able to forecast like archetypal situations, like general kind of like qualities, and he just kept saying like the archetypal kind of energy or feeling of it. And I think that that's really true, but I also think that astrology, I've seen it predict, I predict, you predicted, we've done concrete predictions. So I think if one studies a lot more in depth, there is a point where one can get to be able to, where it is like a super science, where you're able to concretely predict, you drive a green car at this time at this day. But in general, that is a masterful thing. And in general, most people don't even need that. And so just general. Sorry, we were about to say?
No, go ahead. But you're raising a good point that it's kind of making me, I'll hold the point. Finish your sentence.
Okay. So in a sense, I can see both sides of it, because I can see what he's saying is that, okay, well, in the old days, they exaggerated this and made it seem like astrology predicted everything or something. That was his idea. But I also think he just hasn't studied it as much. You know what I mean? Like, if he put his lifetime into it, he might be surprised at what he can predict. That's what I was surprised with. You know what I mean? I did not. I remember telling Ryan when I was first studying, when he was wanting he was making me take these courses, and I had to do readings and have him listen to them and all that. And I was like telling him, I don't think I'll ever be a predictor. I don't think that'll be my thing. I think I'll be more of a counselor. And gosh, looking back, like, I mean, it's insane the amount of stuff that you can predict. And sure, you can be wrong too. And it's a very, very hard thing to do. So, anyways, I don't know. Did you have anything to share about that?
I have a couple of things that I want to share. And I know we started off talking about Rahu and Ketu, but hey, this is how it goes. And that's okay. We'll come back to Rahu and Ketu.
Yeah.
I let's talk for a moment about the concept of science. Because
Okay.
I've been witnessing yet another discussion out there about my system versus your system. Should get like some action figures, right?
Yes. Yes.
And make them go to war with each other, over systems. And really, it kind of came up to me because I think people should just have respect for each other and respect for diversity. But the whole thing of astrology as a science came up, and I don't disagree that astrology is a science. I think it's very much a science. But where I think the distinction has to be made is it's a sacred science. And so if you take the sanctity out of the science, then you're just kind of
I like that.
focusing on something that's going to miss the point with the individual. And if you take the science out of the sanctity, then you don't have anything that can be replicated. And really, to make astrology work best, you have to have a combination of both of those. So really, with astrology, we're kind of trying to understand or measure God's will. We're just mortals. We're going to fall short of the mark somewhere, somehow, some way. And so to go, this system has to be right and the other one's wrong, or that system has to be right and the other one's wrong. Well, what are we going to then do if we, quote unquote, prove that one was right and the other one's wrong? Are we going to have like the astrology police show up at your house going, you're practicing this system, away with you now?
Yeah. That's a really good point. Hypothetically, what is your end game? You know what I mean? Of battling with these systems, what is your end game? Are you really going to lock someone up because they do a different system? Yeah, that's a very good point. What does it matter?
Why persecute each other when we can learn so much from each other?
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense. Another thing I wanted to talk about is the concept of prediction. Because, and the concept of free will, which this is always a fun thing to talk with everybody about. So two different thoughts that come to my mind, and I'd like to hear some reflections from your side, obviously, of course, are if we go to an astrologer and we're looking for the astrologer to predict something for us, do we then just sit back and wait for the prediction to happen and don't do anything? That's one thing, because I've had some recent clients who did that, who go, you predicted that this wasn't going to happen, that this was going to happen to me, and it didn't happen to me, and I wanted it to happen.
And it's your fault.
And well, then the question I asked them was, well, if you wanted that to happen in your life, why didn't you take the steps to make it happen? Right? And to the credit of the situation, if in looking at that person's chart, the planet that was involved had low Digbala. So they couldn't direct the action in order to take it.
Yeah.
That was a hard thing for them. And in addition to that, if we have something that's predicted to us and we take action to try to make it not happen, do we then avoid the karma altogether? Are we able to avoid the karma, first of all? And secondly, if we avert the karma happening in one particular area, I'll give an example. Is it going to happen in a different area? So let's say, for instance, a person's chart is showing you're going to have power conflicts in your relationships, right?
Okay.
So we then go, right, well, I'm not going to spend as much time around my wife as much as I should. So then are you going to have power struggles in your other relationships outside of that? Because you took the steps to avoid that. So how much is free will and how much is predestined?
Michael, I've been thinking about this so much since October-ish. Man, I've just been thinking about this a lot. and I don't know how to really explain it in God. So it's funny that you would ask me that, because I've been debating that a lot lately. And one thing I found that thing is, like, when the reason I don't want to say, like, I feel this hesitation is because saying, like, I heard people say the same things as I might be about to say, and was just like, nah, can't,
Yeah,
don't
but
get
you're
it.
you.
Until I kind of just inwardly made it click on my own, then I was like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. But I had heard other people say this and been like, I don't agree, or I don't know, that doesn't make sense, or wait, but what about this? You know what I mean? And it was, so just saying this may not answer your question or answer a person's question, but you know, like learning. Okay, so I first got into this astrology by doing Kriya Yoga, which is like a very martial, like Shiva type path, about just like doing pranayama and waking the F up, you know what I mean? And just like not engaging in your karma. Yet I was taught by Ryan, who became a great Vedic astrologer, and he wasn't famous then, but he ended up being that way. And so I've talked with Ryan a lot about this, and Ryan is very like different from a lot of astrologers, because he's like, he's just, you can tell he's like, he's more into the yoga and the Kriya Yoga thing of just sticking to like, no, you don't have to believe what's in the chart, you can go beyond it or whatever. He's made me think a lot about these issues, and he's always been reading this book called the Vashishta Yoga, like ever since I knew him. And so I finally started reading that book. I had tried to read it before, and it just wasn't the right time for me. And I finally started reading that book, and I was finally starting to appreciate it. And very early on in that book, the book is basically about like Ram, like an avatar of Vishnu, like God, is basically like Vashit, the sage, teaching God the yoga of like of knowledge. So it's very high-minded and intellectual stuff, and I just couldn't get it the first time I tried to read it. But I'm reading it this time, and they basically say like, the person, like, you're only in the situation you're in because of your effort from a past time. You know what I mean? And so your
Effort's important. Yeah.
Effort is important. That's that. If there was going to be one sentence in my reading, yes, that's it. Okay, so exactly. They basically say it's self-effort is another name. Like they're like they literally say self-effort is just another name for divine will. So we think that divine will and free will are different, but free will is just the same as divine will. It's just when the divine in you decides to do it, decides to finally suck it up and do it.
Good point. I mean? Because, yeah, you know, the thing is if you, so let's assume, using logic, let's assume that people believe in a God. The God that most people would tend to believe in is a God that's omnipresent. So if God is present in one thing, then God is present in you. So that means that there can be nothing outside of God's will. And so then therefore your free will must be the same as God's will. So there can't really be any difference between free will and God's will. Yeah. But that doesn't mean you sit back and go, yeah. It means that sometimes you do that, and sometimes you get involved, because those are the things you're meant to do at those particular times. Whenever I get into this subject, I often like to talk about Magha Nakshatra too, because Magha Nakshatra is obviously connected to the Pitris, or the ancestral deities. And they're known to only interfere in human affairs when it's absolutely necessary.
Okay.
Because they want their successors. Yeah. They want their successors to be able to work it out on their own. Because to be incarnated here, you need to have a strong sense of individuality. So this whole concept that we have of get rid of the ego. Well, in order to get to a space where you can get rid of the ego, you have to have a strong positive ego so that you're able to get rid of the ego.
You have to have something to surrender, or else, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they want people to be in that strength of ego on that level, but also to listen to the wisdom of the higher self, listen to that higher aspect of yourself, follow that guidance and work things out in that way, rather than thinking that you have to sort it out up here. I mean, you know, regardless.
That makes sense.
And this is why I'm never a big fan of people going. I made a mistake. I screwed up. I'm going to lash myself across the back endlessly for that. Because really, if there's no separation between your will and God's will, you didn't make a mistake.
Yeah, astrology just shows us that everything is God ultimately. And
Yes,
so
exactly.
every astrologer I talk to who has a spiritual bent and has been doing this for more than a decade has such a more detached attitude about all of life. You know what I mean? I've noticed. And just talking with you about this, it's so nice to hear someone else say these things, you know? And also that's neat about Maga because isn't that one ruled by Ketu? Or am I
It's
thinking of the...
ruled it's ruled by Ketu, and I kind of like looking at the nakshatras in terms of like a spiritual journey. With Ashwini kind of being like the primal spark where things begin. What's happening with Magha Nakshatra, because it's the first of the Tamasic based nakshatras, is the soul is becoming more deeply encased in its physical form. And it's got this memory of, having been connected to the source. And it's also recognizing that it's kind of here in a physical body. And one part of it is pissed. it's pissed because it's going, well, wait a second, I had this really wonderful connection here, and now I'm here in this physical body having to sort things out. And so it's like the rebellion that the individual consciousness has against God, so to speak. And it goes,
okay.
That's the more negative side of Magha. It goes, I'm gonna, do this, sod all that. I don't really care. I'm not gonna pay attention to that. When in reality, it's about remembering that connection.
Yeah, I mean, and I can see, and they say K2 acts like Mars, and Mars is kind of the planet of free will, and so I can sort of see a connection there as well, So to bring it back to the Rahu and Ketu thing,
I was going to say we should try to bring it back.
Yeah, to bring it back to the Rahu and Ketu thing, of all the placements on the chart, I think the ones that are hardest to change with your free will are the Rahu and Ketu. And that's why we astrologers end up spending so much time on that. And those are the things that you're oftentimes most destined or fated to face. I think a lot of us agree on that. Eclipses, that's kind of the whole vibe of eclipses, is this feeling of something unavoidable. You know what I mean? And this sort of faded, I hate to use that word, but this faded feeling or energy. And, if you think about it, if even the sun, which is the best symbol of God we have, to, you know what I mean? You normally can't even look at it for more than a second without going blind, just like how a normal person can't perceive God consciousness for more than a moment. It's the same thing. And so if that's getting blocked out, if that can't avoid it, then we certainly can't avoid this thing. You know what I mean? So there's a sort of feeling. Doesn't mean that every time an eclipse happens, bad things happen. I actually had a great experience this last eclipse. The one in August was much more stressful, but overall, this eclipse for me has been really good. But I know this one has kind of been different for a lot of different people. It's been very, very variable.
It has. Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. And talking about what you were bringing up about Ketu and Rahu, I often like telling people because, and this is going to sound fatalistic to a lot of people, but if you're talking about the nodes, you're talking about fatalistic on a certain level.
Yeah.
And what we said earlier, what you said earlier was very important. It's about the effort and putting the effort towards it. But people quite often, I find, who come to me as an astrologer have this mindset that if they figure out what Ketu and Rahu is about, then it's going to make it all kind of disappear, all the difficulty disappear. And it doesn't work that way, right? I like what Ernst has to say about Rahu, even though it sounds really negative on one level, it's very humorous on the other, which is when you're dealing with Rahu, or if you're dealing with Rahu Dasha, all you have to do is stay alive.
Yeah.
Because you don't do Rahu Dasha and you don't really do Ketu Dasha. They kind of do their own thing.
They do you.
Right, exactly. And the more you try to control it, generally the more difficult it becomes. And so then inevitably the next question I get from clients is, well, why should I even bother? Well, because when you're doing the work that's connected to Rahu or doing the work that's connected to Ketu, you're going through deeper and deeper layers. If you're aware of what you're working on, you're able to work through a lot more. And we have to stop thinking of this lifetime as being like the be all end all. You know what I mean? This basically you're looking at a drop in the bucket. right?
I know. It's like
So,
thinking
yeah,
this day is the only
yeah,
day that's ever mattered. You know what I mean?
right,
And in the same
exactly.
way, I had countless days that happened before this that I don't even remember, you know?
Exactly. And so it's a point of bringing your attention to it, doing the work that's there, but don't expect that because you're doing the work, it's going to make it all go away. It's actually going to
Yeah.
make you deepen the process, which is really good. It's really good to deepen that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the way I want to do astrology. Other people can do it other ways, but I think because I came from like that Kriya Yoga, or like reading Yogananda, and people are talking about, using your willpower and working through these things. And there are times when, like a couple years ago, I was feeling very. It was actually my ruling planet was crossing Rahu, which is like this most fated energy,
Right.
this dark energy, and it's described as dark. And so I remember at that time looking back, I felt the least able to change. I just felt like everything was so hopeless, so, you know what I mean, or despondent, like I'm just kind of stuck doing this. And, it really helped for me to listen to videos where Ernst said, like, you just got to stay alive for this period, just keep trucking along, or things like that. That really helped. But eventually that will pass. And then even if you didn't do anything, eventually that will pass. And you'll have a time where, Mars is stronger in your consciousness and you feel like you can do things, you know what I mean? And you feel like you can make a difference. And I guess it's like, it's just, even though, like if you ask a Sat guru or a perfect enlightened master, is there free will? They'll say no. There's actually no free will. Everything is God's will. And that is true.
It
But
is.
from our standpoint, we need to feel like there is free will, and we need to feel that we are doing the thing. And that, like you were saying, it just causes your consciousness to go deeper, or somehow structures your awareness to build and to be more productive than if you just think everything doesn't mean anything. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't create the right vibrations or mental states or whatever that make you grow as a person. So there's like the Vishishta Yoga says, one is a fool who just basically rests on their past efforts. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
if you aren't doing things in the now, in this present day, to make things better, then eventually you're going to fall right back down to a bad place sooner or later.
Well, it's also like in the Bhagavad Gita, where the whole thing of not having any right to the fruits of your actions, but that's not an
Yeah,
excuse for inaction.
exactly. And that Arjuna was the symbol of the fire chakra of Mars.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that was, in my opinion, a great allegory, and a great allegory for that, what to do with your Mars. And then what is Mars's only enemy is Mercury. All these thoughts and ideas and conversing, oh, well, what about this? What about free will? This intellectual idea that's now come into my head, and how do I
Mars,
wrestle with that?
Mars just goes, shut up and just do something.
Yeah, just get away. Yeah, just goes ahead. And we need that. Yeah, we do. And so, oh yeah, it's kind of a weird one. But if you have Rahu on your ascendant, you might feel like it's so hopeless with yourself or your body, but you need to work on that. And eventually you'll have created enough, that motion or that momentum that it won't feel so hopeless, and you'll be moving in the direction.
I find like a common thing that happens with people with Rahu in the first is this tendency to identify who they are with what is out there, right? So
Yeah.
let's say a Rahu in the first house person gets into astrology. I'm really into astrology. Astrology is my thing. I'm going to become an astrologer.
Hmm.
But wait, there's something missing. I'm not there, right?
Hmm.
And so then they start latching onto something else looking for themselves.
Yeah,
Only
that's a
they're
good
not
point.
there either until they finally discover that these things that I'm getting into are different from the self. This is something I'm getting into and I'm interested in. And it's a difficult path with Rahu in the first house.
Yeah.
So many things
That's
going on. And I don't mean this as an insult, but if you also understand that the first house is the mind,
yeah.
it's very difficult to grasp onto something for any long period of time before it vanishes.
Yeah, no, that's true. And like with the example of my brother being a Leo, he actually has, he has the Rahu in the first and the Ketu in the seventh. And so he's having his nodes return. And so, yeah, his favorite bar he was so identified with, and it closes. And he was also very, always into music and a lot of these things, but he does have that tendency where he will do it more to get validation from the other people. He's more like trying to please others, or just more invested in the others than just doing it for fun and doing it for himself and feel like I'm a great musician. I can just play at home all day and have a blast. You know what I mean? It's interesting.
So something I wanted to discuss too, because we were on this topic earlier and then we kind of moved on to something else, is one of the things that's actually happening with Ketu and Rahu, because people often have this concept that if you're in, that in your life, once you understand what Rahu's about, you're supposed to ignore Ketu.
Yeah, no.
And people get this misconception. And in reality, what I think happens with Ketu, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about it too, is with Ketu is what we know and what we're comfortable with, right? But I often like telling people, previous lifetimes you could have been in prison, right? So you know how to be in prison really well, but it's not something that you necessarily want. So, you got to find a way to get yourself out of that. And that's what Rahu's job is, to pull you out of that. But because you've been in this isolated space for so long, that when you get tossed out into the material world, it all just seems so damn confusing to you that you can't make any sense to it. So you freak out and you retreat back to Ketu, which is what you knew before. And so basically two very important things are going on there. With Ketu, you're integrating all the stuff that was happening in Rahu. It's giving you that space for retreat. With Rahu, you're exploring all those things that you haven't had a chance to explore, and you're kind of leaving the confines of what used to be comfortable and safe and secure for you. And so basically you end up having this pendulum swing from one extreme to the other, when the idea is to find that balance in between the two.
I see that as well. And even in my own life, I'm like, gosh, I've seen myself do that. And so there are always exceptions, but I would say that in general, it's about like the intelligent balance of both of these things. Yeah. You know what I mean? And the K2 thing is usually what you want more. It's like your heart, it's like the part that's cut off from a head. It's just a chest and a body and a tail or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's like your heart, you know what I mean? It's like, it's where you actually, what you want so sincerely, but then you have to do that Rahu thing and you balance that out. And it's like as you get, like I've seen myself as I'm getting older, I can see that I don't maybe feel like I need the K2 thing as much, but it's still what I love. And it's still what you're innately going to do. Like we don't even realize how innately we're always using our K2 so frequently. It's so hard to explain it, but I would say that you're actually working on both of these things all the time. Like we might think we're always working on the Rahu, but we're also working on that Ketu. At least, you know what I mean? My Ketu issues are maybe coming up even more often than Rahu. It's kind of, so we're always working on both. Yeah, we're not just focusing on Rahu and ignoring Ketu, because Ketu is this, as what did Ernst say? He's like, Ketu is the fort, it literally means a flag. You know what I mean? So it symbolizes like a fort or a castle. But it's like our castle of imperfections, or like, being perfect at being in jail. Well, come on, like go into this new world. And even if you're not perfect in the free world, it's better than being in jail. But there are some differences, and or it can depend. And then that's where like the dignity of the planets can depend. Mm-hmm. So like if K2 is like with a fallen Saturn and all that, or like just some really, really bad dignity stuff, then that might be a part of someone that they're not trying to go back to. You know what I mean? That they're like, okay, I did not learn a lesson there, and I need to train and it can be a lot more important to focus on Rahu. Another way we can see that is if the Lord of Rahu is with Ketu, or if the Lord of Ketu is with Rahu, one or the other can be a lot more important. And I'm still just trying to figure that out, to be honest with you. So I'm still like studying that, but I noticed that with people who have their Lord of Rahu is over with Ketu, or the opposite, that can make it a lot more confusing. And
I find that when you have the Lord of Rahu with Ketu, if the dispositor of Ketu and equally that Lord of Rahu are both strong, then the individual has a large potential for integration on that path during this particular lifetime. And if the Lord of Ketu is with Rahu and it's the same way, then it becomes very intense. Rahu Dasha becomes very intense.
Yeah, like it becomes
so
like
much stuff
very desperate that they develop Rahu, right? Like it becomes like much more urgent. And the other way is it can be a lot more not as urgent. Like in saints and spiritual yogis, I've noticed that the Lord of Rahu is with Ketu. So it's like it's more about the Ketu liberation karma than it is going and creating a new Rahu thing. You know what I mean? Like they just need to do a little bit of this Rahu stuff, but it's in much more about going back to the Ketu thing or the moksha or whatever. Yeah, cool. Definitely. Okay, cool. Yeah, because I'm glad you feel that way too, because I'm kind of always I think about that one a lot.
It can be a confusing one. Another confusing one is when you have the Lord of Ketu with Ketu and the Lord of Rahu with Rahu.
Yeah, yeah.
I find that I've experienced a lot of people with Ketu's dispositor with Ketu and they feel really stuck. But what they're perhaps not understanding is that the stuck energy that they're feeling is something that's very necessary for the development of their consciousness, because this lifetime is about sticking with that Ketu energy, learning more through it, really bringing more to it and completing it.
Yeah, completing it. That's a good word. Yeah.
But it feels so repetitive to them that they don't have an easy time dealing with the energy. Because to give an example, I had a particular case of somebody who wanted to develop their own thing. It was the typical Ketu seventh, Rahu first, and they didn't want to always be reliant on their relationships, especially financially reliant on their relationships. Yet every time they tried to break free of the cycle, no, it just pulled them back to it. Over and over and over again. And there was something that was there for them to learn from that this lifetime, and it's about getting to the root of what you're meant to learn with that. And it doesn't feel pleasant, but once you accept what it's about, it becomes, yeah,
definitely.
So here's something I like to ask. So let's talk a little bit about Kala Sarpa yoga.
Okay.
So it's just a very simple question.
All right.
Blessing or a curse?
Oh, yeah. I'd say it's a mixed blessing. I'd say we should, I don't know, it would depend, because I would say that Kala Sarpa yoga people are people who are very, very extreme people. Like there's something very extreme about them, and they're oftentimes going to change the world in some way, or like they're going to do something very significant, but that can be very bad or good. So I would say that could be a blessing or a curse. But you can see, like, George Bush and Donald Trump are two obvious big examples of like a Kala Sarpa yoga in the world. But then you can see it in this charts of very opposite, like very unworldly, very extreme mental, spiritual types of people. I'm pretty sure Nikola Tesla had a Kala Sarpa yoga, or like basically he had all of his planets on the side of, they were going from Rahu to Ketu. And so I think we should look at that. So if all the planets are going from Rahu to Ketu, we should probably interpret that differently from if all the planets are going from Ketu to Rahu. I haven't really studied that enough to say, but when I look at the charts of, even if someone has like all the planets on one side and then the moon's over on the other side, or like almost has it, they can be a very extreme type of person, and they can be too fanatical sometimes about whatever they're into.
Oh, that's interesting. What I have also found with that particular placement, well, two things. First of all, I think with Kala Sarpa yoga that basically the individual has no choice but to develop surrender. It's kind of like they're being forced onto that path.
That might be why they're so fanatical or something. They don't want to do that.
Exactly. If you have that one planet that's outside of the chain, that planet becomes that focal planet that the individual feels is their release from the fatalistic chain that they're going through, because it's not in between that.
I think it's really like this is a new idea that Ernst was talking about when I was over there back in November, and he was talking about planets in the middle of Rahu and Ketu can really help to kind of like balance them and
Well, that's a
mitigate
good
it.
concept. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've not really played around with that too much, but it would apply in that example. You know what I mean? Like what you're saying is basically the same thing. If there's a planet in the middle ground, can be like a respite or like a balancing factor.
Mm-hmm.
And that would make sense, just symbolically and everything. That would make a lot of sense. I don't know if I've studied that. And I think with the Kala Sarpa yoga, that would vary quite a bit with the rest of the chart. So in the chart of someone who is, it would just depend on the chart. Like I know a lot of people that have Kala Sarpa that aren't super crazy, but they'll still be very extreme. Like they have a very extreme. They don't have a basic life. They don't have a normal type of life. It's like a very one-sided type of life or something like that, like think of Donald Trump's life, you know what I mean, or something like that. That's one extreme example. But then there are people like I know several personal friends or spiritual people that I know who just live kind of like not your normal life, but they're not crazy either.
Yeah.
But they might be a little extreme in certain ways. You know what I mean? So if all the planets are in good states and all, they might be very extreme, but not in as unhealthy ways as someone like, say, Bush or something, right, who had that really rough Saturn-Sun conjunction.
Feel sorry for him.
Yeah.
So I thought what we might do, first of all, I want to apologize to everybody. If you see me putting little things in my mouth, it's like if I don't like have like throat lozenges, eventually I'm going to be like this. So I don't mean to be like eating and chomping on things on camera. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons I'm wearing the headset. But I thought maybe what we might do is take some questions. Are you ready for that?
Sounds good.
So let's see. And so those of you who are watching live, you can now feel free. I know you've all been doing it already anyway, but you can please feel free to type in some general questions about some of the things we've been talking about or things you'd like to interact with us about. Again, we're not going to go into interpreting your chart. So here's a good question. So I'm going to pull this one out. Somebody says, so if divine will is the same as free will, why learn astrology for predictions?
Well, don't learn it if you don't want to. If divine will, first off, I'm really glad you asked that, because that's all I really want to talk about is this free will thing is all I'm thinking about. Free will is the same as divine will. Just think about it. What could be freer than the divine?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we're calling it free will. Well, what is it? What's free? There's only one thing that's free, and that's the divine. So that's another way you can look at it. But to answer his question, why study astrology? Only do what you love. That's the key to life. You know what I mean? So if you don't feel a sattvic inspiration to study astrology and to learn predictions, then do not do it, because you're probably doing it from a rajas guna or a thinking you can somehow cheat life, or like you were saying about people who get readings and learn about Rahu and Ketu and then think they've like sort of solved the key to life and they're never going to suffer anymore. You know what I mean? Or they're going to just like by doing some little mantra thing to Rahu every morning, they're going to go and be fine and never have to deal with their problems. And that's a shortcut. And that's people who are, that's very prominent nowadays with spirituality, is people want to bypass the psychological growth stage, but which you have to get to. You have to become
not a good idea.
Sure. And you have to become, like you're saying, you have to develop the fire, the willpower, the self before you can surrender. If you're mentally ill, God doesn't want you to surrender. You know what I mean? Like if you don't have anything to surrender, then God doesn't care, But it's only when you become a great successful person and have conquered that Kshatriya stage of fire element that you're able to move into the moksha or the Brahmin stage of merging with the infinite. Because then you finally have developed a willpower and you know right from wrong. But until we've developed the fire, we don't even know right from wrong, really, And we don't really know, we haven't developed our ethics and our morals enough to even be able to properly surrender to the infinite and the absolute. Astrology is just a tool that we use to help us get there, to get to that zone. So whether you want predictions or not, or whatever you want to do, it's all just ultimately to get us to that final stage where we can merge with the infinite. And no, you do not need predictions, and you do not need to study astrology to get to that stage.
I think that's mainly what they're getting at, like
Yeah,
why
you don't.
use astrology for predictions if so,
No, but
I do have a thought I want to add about that
okay,
is that
because I had another part that I wanted to add
oh,
too.
go for it. You go first. No, you
All
go
right, but
first.
that's because that's not the full answer. Because then the second question is, but if you're if you see all this and you see this philosophy, then you see that there is no real separation between spiritual and material realities. So, from my standpoint, to help someone materially is to help someone spiritually, because it's all the same thing. And you have incarnated with desires that your
Yeah,
mind has to fulfill. So my job is to help you fulfill them or help you move beyond them if you're at that stage.
exactly.
Yeah, if
Perfect.
you're ready for
Perfectly said.
that. But you're not always ready for that, and I'm not always ready for that. So I'm like here to meet you where you're at. And the chart is what makes it so great, because
Right.
we can give like good advice is just I've got books worth of good advice, but it's like, what is the right advice for this person at this particular stage? You know what I mean? At this age in their life. And that's where astrology has really helped me personally.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. So you basically said what I was going to say
Okay, good. All right, because I
in
had a
different
feeling you
words.
might. All
I
right.
was just going to say, I think that, number one, sometimes we can't focus on what the lesson we need to learn is because we're so caught up in what's going on out there. So sometimes
Yeah.
we need to have our mind put at ease or learn to accept that something may not happen so that we can get into the space where we can accept what might be the root cause behind the malady or the disease that we're experiencing, in our external life, that's manifesting as monetary problems or not able to find a job or low self-esteem. What's
Yeah.
at the root of that? Right. But
Yeah.
we're kind of just going, right, I'm not getting along with anybody I'm working with. When am I going to find a job I can get along with people on? Well, maybe that person needs to hear never, because you've got
Yeah.
this Rahu Mars conjunction in your chart. You're just going to have power struggles, but you're also in a period right now where that's probably going to be a little bit worse than it's going to be like, this time in the future.
Yeah.
You need to learn
Yeah.
and make the most from it right
Yeah,
now.
like, and you explaining that, they now know why. Like, they know why this is all happening,
Yeah.
and they now have a bigger, grander view of life and themselves, and everyone's suffering, and then we all have these issues, and so astrology is the eye of the Veda, and branding plug, but I'm just saying it's the truth because it really is the eye that lets us see the God. Like, I always believed that everything was God, but I now, like, the more, like, it wasn't until doing the math and looking at the chart. It's like in math class when I was coming up, in order to know if you cheated or just copied someone else, the teacher would say you have to show your work. Like, they didn't want to just see the answer, but they wanted to see your writing of
What
like
led
the
you to that
formula.
answer?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like what led you to that answer. So this is like astrology. If you're an intellectual person and you believe in God, but you don't really see how God is doing everything, then
Right.
you have astrology. You have a whole life to just pick apart all these things and see God in everything. Yeah.
Right. And that's ultimately why Rahu and Ketu are so important. I find, regardless of if I'm answering a predictive question or what I'm looking at, I'm always looking at Rahu and Ketu anyway,
Yeah.
because we want to understand why that's happening.
And
So go ahead. Go
know,
ahead. I'm going to look at another question for us. Go ahead.
okay. One more point on that is that one thing I really like to look at that. I think Ernst was the first person that I heard say this, but he was saying that K2 is like your first experience of God in your life. And that's what makes it that way. So Rahu's like the last likely thing you want to experience as God. And so again, if we're spiritual people, we kind of have to like learn to see all of it. Learn to see all of it.
Definitely. Definitely. Here's a good question. Leela is considered divine play. How, in your opinion, does that differ from divine will, if it's all a divine play?
There really is no difference. It's only in our individualized standpoint that there is a difference. And so, the avatar that whenever like Krishna or avatar incarnates, he's always like kind of playing games and joking. And, is it just a coincidence that the planet of jokes and humor and trickster, Mercury, is also the planet of Vishnu, God, the avatar? So, yeah, it's all just a divine play. And it's the play of when will you wake up? When will you realize that the only reason you've been suffering is you? You know what I mean? Or when will I ever, you know what I mean? That's the
Exactly.
game, is
Yes.
when will I decide that I've done it? You know what I mean? And even talking about this now, it doesn't mean I'm enlightened. I'm not trying to say that I'm enlightened. Astrology has really helped me, and I might be somewhere on some spectrum, but I'm still just as much in all of this as everyone else. And I just, honestly, like since Jupiter in Scorpio, I've been thinking about all these things a lot more deeply. And all of astrology, if you use it right, it can lead you to God, or you can just get all into like, oh, I'm not able to do this because of this placement or all that. You know what I mean? You can use it as a tool to limit yourself if you want, but there's another higher use of it. I'm still just, that's what I'm thinking, and that's what I'm trying to figure out. So that's how I feel. So at this stage, I would say that Leela, if you see life as that, a play, the divine will, these are all just terms in our mind that cause us to not see the self, and at the end of the day.
Is a good reason. I've always felt that one of the biggest steps to resolving your karma is letting go of guilt.
Yeah.
But you don't just do that up here, because you can't just go, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to feel guilty about that, because you still feel it here.
Yeah, you still do.
And so you got to get into here. That's the harder bit. And so once you get out of there, that's when you're able to really forgive yourself. Forgiveness doesn't happen up here. That's why I'm never a big fan of people going, oh, you just need to let it go. You can't just let things go. Letting go happens. It doesn't get forced. But, maybe sometimes we need to bring our attention to it. And I think that's really what people are trying to say with that. But I think the more we kind of hang on to things that have brought us to a certain place that we don't like, the more we kind of stand a greater chance of getting into, what's the word I want to use? Self-criticism, rather than actually taking action and dealing with the situation at hand. So you can say maybe you need to get into that first in order to be able to get out of it. But at the same time, it's one of those things that at some point you have to kind of get into the space of trying to let yourself move beyond it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just a realization that you need to move beyond it. Because yes, we did kind of create this thing. I always like sharing this with people. I probably said this like hundreds of times in my videos. I'm going to say it again though. I once heard it put really well in a book. And if I could repeat it word by word, I would. And it was one of those wonderful books that I found like in a dollar bin outside of a shop.
Oh, perfect. That's just how God does it. The trickster. That's how God does it.
Right. So it was one of those books that basically it had it put down in words about how we see things can you hold on a moment? So I was finishing the point that I was talking about, which was because we see things in the world at large because of light reflecting off of objects that we are seeing. And so we encounter objects, which is good, because otherwise we would trip over those objects, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it's a similar thing in the realm of consciousness, that we encounter consciousness because of the light of who we are as an individual reflecting off of things that are obstructing us from being able to perceive that light. And so we encounter consciousness.
I like that. I've actually never heard you say that, so I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Hey, everybody, I'm really sorry. It's my son's bedtime, so I have to go on this end. Corey, it's been really wonderful having you on. Do you want to tell people where they can find you if they want to schedule a consultation?
Yeah, check out www.eyeoftheveda.com, or you can also check out my YouTube channel. It's YouTube/Eye of the Veda. And this course that I talked about is available on my blog, or you can also go to astrologyisscience.com. If that doesn't work, I don't know, just Google my name. You should find my site. Send me an email. We'll figure it out.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Talk to you later, Corey.
All right. Bye.
Bye now.